Welcome into another News4JAGs podcast. I'm Jamal Saints here alongside Justin Barney. Things are picking up at this point. The Jaguars have officially started off-season workouts. The team is kind of back together, getting some of that, lifting in, some culture building this time of year, which is good, especially because things get quiet at some point. So it's always fun to give it a little of something extra.
Right, you were there last week when the Jaguars opened off season. Just how cool it was to see Trevor back in talking about a new year, how things were stable and familiar with him. And then we got to see Calvin Ridley coming in and shake hands with everybody in the media access room, and it was just really cool to see to see him in person and to hear his take on his time away, and really felt like he could be an excellent receiver, a 1,400-yard a season receiver, which, if that's the case, that would be the second highest total in franchise history, tied for number 2 with Allen Robinson, only behind Jimmy Smith. So that's some pretty lofty expectations from Calvin Ridley, but he seems ready to fulfill those.
I am a 1,400-yard type of player. God is going to determine what type of stats I am going to have. And, football is not just, football is serious. I mean, you don't just play 17 games straight and think you're going to be in every one of them and playing healthy in all of them. So what I'm saying is I am a 1,400-yard receiver with a broke foot. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
That's what I'm saying. So I know that I can make the plays, and I know that I'm one of the better receivers in this league. That's what I'm saying.
I think Ridley was definitely the most eager of anybody on the Jaguars roster just to get back to football. It's not often that you hear a guy say that he misses the smell of a locker room. I know it's the NFL, and the locker room doesn't smell as bad as like a high school locker room, but it still don't smell great. So he really wanted to get back to football. I'm just saying, you rarely hear somebody say that one. No, I think Calvin Ridley is going to be able to bring something to the team. He's definitely the biggest offseason addition. He's a guy who's focused, and he's going to try and prove a lot of people wrong. If he does, that's very good for the Jaguars, at least as far as what the future could hold for them. And you know what? If he hits 1,400 yards, you get 1,000 from Christian Kirk, you get like 800 from Evan Ingram. Trevor Lawrence is going to be in like some MVP conversations at that point, because everybody's getting yards left and right, and he's got to be slinging it. So that'd be good all around.
Every way, and again, just what he brings. We've talked about this before. The unknown with Calvin Ridley is big because, again, he's not played a football game in almost 2 years, and that's there's something to be said about the ring rust or the field rust in that situation. So you could look at it that way. They didn't play for 2 years, but Calvin said what it did for him mentally, what it did for him physically, allowed him to heal and restore and recover from a lot of significant injuries, physical injuries as well, but the mental ones as well, which he initially took time off from the Falcons to get away and recharge from that. So yes, the time away is a little worrisome because we don't know what he's going to be. We don't have that to kind of look back and say, he was a 1,000-yard receiver last year. Calvin Ridley is a little bit of an enigma and an unknown right now, but it's a good problem to have. I think he's going to be highly motivated. I think throwing with Trevor and seeing what he's got to work with on that field, it's going to be the best group of pro receivers he's played with. I think it's going to be awesome to have Calvin Ridley in Jacksonville.
He said, he knows he's gotten wiser. Why can't he be stronger and faster coming back too? So he's just going to have to show some of those things. He did mention that he's dealing with some of the muscle tightness already from some of the workouts that they've got going on, but we'll get a chance to get a look at him a little bit later on in the offseason as he continues to work out with some of the guys. Trevor Lawrence did mention that he's been impressed with what he's seen from Ridley so far, and Foye Oluokun, who's a former Falcons teammate, gave him a big cosign. So far, all the receipts are good. The other thing that's going on with the Jaguars is we're counting down to the NFL draft. I'm a draftnik, so I like the NFL draft, kind of one of my times a year. Trent Baalke mentioned that he has 3 players that he really has his eye on for when the Jaguars are on the clock. They have the 24th overall pick this year instead of the 1st overall, and I think that's a happy change. I can almost guarantee Trent Baalke and Doug Peterson are going to enjoy watching the Texans and the Panthers deal with all the drama up there at the top of the draft and say, we'll just wait and hope one of our 3 guys falls to us.
I know last year when we were doing pre-draft luncheon, the question was asked about, next year, and Trent said, being this year, if we're picking number 1 next year, it's going to be somebody else making that pick. Yeah. So a credit to Trent and Doug for turning that thing.
Hey, that was foresight. It's right there.
Exactly. Interesting, though, that Trent has really kind of rolled with the punches in this, and he's really regained some credibility in the eyes of a lot of people after his last drafts and the free agency haul last year.
His drafts have come out really well. They have had a lot of hits, some finds along the way. We'll see what they have in store this year. So one of the things that he's mentioned leading up to the drafts, they have like 3 guys that they really think will be available, that they hope are in that range. Now that doesn't mean that someone something couldn't happen and a top-ranked player slides to them and he's not one of those three. But it created some discussion about who you think those three players are. For me, I kind of narrowed it. I think it's safety Brian Branch from Alabama. I think it's Osiris Torrance, the guard from Florida, and Nolan Smith, the pass rusher from Georgia. That's who my swing at the three are. I think those three make sense. They've all visited the Jaguars. They've all talked to the Jaguars, and they would all fit needs on the team.
Right. And two of those I agree with, and I think I could even expand on that. I think Miles Murphy could be a guy.
If he's there.
But my three would be Osiris Torrance, Brian Branch, and my third one, Deontay Banks, not Deontay Smith. No, I'm thinking Nolan Smith. I don't think Nolan Smith's going to be there at 24 either. I'd jump at Nolan Smith if he was there.
That was the problem. Like, I was talking to Frank Frangie yesterday, and we'll go through, we've each got a mock draft we'll go through here in a second. And one of the things that he brought up is he really thinks that the Jaguars need to improve edge, and that in my mock draft, spoiler alert, there's not an edge very early on in it. And I said, Frank, I think you're 100% right, but there's got to be one that's valued there. If Miles Murphy falls to 24, take him. Run the pick in. I don't think he's going to be there. If Nolan Smith falls to 24, take him. Run the pick in. I don't think he's going to be there either. And those are things that create problems because pass rushers are always heavily valued. Both of those guys are insane athletes.
Right.
And when you look at it and you say, look at the draft history, a guy who's an insane athlete at a position of need and a position that's overall pretty weak in the draft, generally those guys are gone. It's just how it works.
Lucas Van Ness
Lucas Van Ness is another guy.
When ESPN had him mocked to Jacksonville a couple weeks ago at number 24. Every mock you see, Lucas Van Ness is nowhere to. He's going at between 8 and 15 in mock drafts. He's not there. So I do think that if a situation like that happens, where you've got a guy, it happens every year. You've got a guy who's a green room kind of guy, and he ends up dropping to the the 15s to 20s, where you're not expecting him to fall. So that will happen this year. It's a question if a guy like if a Nolan Smith kind of character, a Lucas Van Ness ends up falling that far. We thought early on it could be a Jalen Carter after his legal troubles. He may have dropped from that top 3, kind of top 5 area, and he still may drop a little bit, but he's not going to fall out of the top 10.
No, I think Nolan Smith out of the top pass rushers has the best chance to fall just because he's so small. He didn't have a ton of college production, but he's an insane athlete, so he could still go very early. I think Miles Murphy is too big, too strong, too fast. I don't think it's going to happen. I think you say the same thing about Lucas Van Ness. Too big, too strong, too fast. Those guys, some teams are going to sell themselves on this guy and take them very early on, at least in the teens. So I think we've kind of gone into the weeds on the pass rushers enough. All right, let's start with 24. Do you want to give your first round pick first?
You
want me to go first? All right. I've got one of my 3. I went with safety Brian Branch from Alabama at 24 for the Jaguars. And to me, it was a simple pick. He's on the board. He fits a big need, but more than that, I think he fits the culture. Brian Branch is a smart player, loves football, played for Nick Saban. And one thing that Nick Saban, if you know about him, loves defensive backs. A lot of his defensive backs going to have good careers in the NFL. Brian Branch played just about every position for him in that secondary, played a ton of snaps early on and throughout his career. Saban entrusted a lot of his defense to him. This is a guy that knows ball. He would bring a smart player who loves football to this defense, and he just so happens he fits the biggest position of need to me on the defense, which is a nickel slot defender. Eventually, maybe they move him out to safety, but he gives them a bunch of flexibility day one, where now all of a sudden that 3 safety lineup that we saw at times late in the season, where it was Andre Sisco, Rayshon Jenkins, and Dewey, now it's Andre Sisco, Rayshon Jenkins, and Brian Branch. And so now that you don't lose as much when you say, okay, this can be strong against the run because we've got 3 safeties. But Brian Branch can also cover their slot guy, so it's also strong against the pass. So I think he would be a big upgrade. He's my guy at 24.
Okay, interesting. I'm gonna stay in that area, but I'm gonna switch the pick. And this guy, I don't know if he will be there at 24. Mentioned a minute ago, Deontay Banks of Maryland, a cornerback. He reminds me of, in a little bit of Tyson Campbell. Didn't have that immense, exceptional production out in his final season in college. Tyson at Georgia, when he was picked, you're scratching your head. Said, this guy didn't pick off a pass. What are they doing? What are they ticking him? And Tyson Campbell has turned into the best guy on Jacksonville in their secondary. So Deontay Banks, to me, he's one of the top 5 corners. I think pretty consensus in this draft. Again, it fills a need. Their nickel cornerback spot, to me, even though you got Trey Herndon there, that's a vacancy that needs to be addressed, because how often in the NFL are you playing with against five receiver sets. So you've got to get there. That nickel coverage is so important in today's NFL. And I would take Deonte Banks over Brian Branch. I know Brian, a good college career, and I think people had some problems with how he tested at the combine. Didn't have great off-season kind of stuff where the underwear games, underwear Olympics, they kind of say. But Deonte Banks to me is a guy that could fit that nickel position. And I like other guys. I like Tyree Wilson. I love Nolan Smith, Lucas Van Ness. But in the mock simulators that I ran for this, all those guys were gone. Brian Branch was also gone in that mock draft as well.
Branch may go earlier. All the pass rushers more than likely will be gone. My only thing with Banks, I really like him. I'm not sure that he's going to be on the board either, because he's so big, so fast, very good cornerback. My only thing that kind of has shied me away from him at times is in his career at Maryland, he played almost exclusively on the outside.
Right.
So to me, the biggest problem that the Jaguars had last season, where all of a sudden the defense found its way late in the year, is because they put Darius Williams on the outside and not in the slot, where he played early on in the season. If you draft a guy like Banks, which if you think back to the Tyson Campbell pick, who you compared him to, they drafted Tyson Campbell and they trotted in and said, Tyson Campbell's going to be our nickel. We're going to play him in the slot. And then they got to training camp and realized that wasn't going to work.
He was bad.
If they get into that situation with a guy who's played very exclusively on the outside, the Jaguars would be sitting there like, oh my God, what have we done? And now you've got Banks and Campbell who both need to play outside, and I think they could be an exceptional bookend tandem there. So I'm not against the pick, but you just have to put Darius Williams back in the slot, which then puts the defense back in the conundrum that it was in last year because they figured out Williams' best position wasn't there. That's my only, but I love Banks as a player. I think he's going to be gone. I think if he gets past like a Green Bay, I'd be surprised. Big, fast, was shut down in Maryland. He would be a good pick. I could get with that pick for sure. The one thing, all right, so let's move to the second round. The one thing that I kind of wanted to balance as I've kind of gone through this draft process as well, I want to invest resources into fixing the defense. I don't want to put too much away from the offense because when you have a young quarterback and hopefully a generational quarterback like Trevor Lawrence, ultimately you never want to just keep investing defense. So with the second round pick, I went offensive line. I went Matthew Bergeron, a tackle from Syracuse. He's played both tackle spots in his collegiate career and could easily play some guard. So all of a sudden, people like, I passed on Osiris Torrance. Bergeron gives them a ton of flexibility there where he can compete with Walker Little for that right tackle job. If Cam Robinson leaves in a year and they move Walker over, or they want to have Bergeron compete for that job, all of a sudden now you have chess pieces that can move around. He's very well thought of. He's a great run blocker, still has some fine-tuning he can do in the pass game, but he helps to ease the void of losing Jawan Taylor. And this pick is actually in the same vein as picking Walker Little a couple of years ago. Solve a problem with a good player before it becomes a problem.
Right, and that's I think with some of my picks, I try to do the same as well because we've talked here many times before about having an eye towards the future as well because, again, you saw like the Jawan Taylor incident. It's perfect. You draft a guy in the second round, you develop him. Ideally, you would have been able to sign him to that second big contract, but it did not occur because Jawan got paid and Jaguars were in a little financial situation. But that is a perfect situation. You draft a guy, and Jawan came in and played, and earned his role, and got better and better. Had his best season when in a contract year, which is great. But I think you've got to plan for that future. Again, you're looking at a Cam Robinson situation, which is he could be expendable starting as early as next year, with some cap savings. So in a sense, it's the same situation as a Walker Little thing, where you draft Walker and he's not ready his first year to play. He's still not ready that second year to get in and play, but he's ready this year. So that's a good one there. Yeah. So I went a little bit different with the second pick at
Michael
number 56. I did not. Michael Mayer was off the board. So I unfortunately, and Osiris Torrance was off the board in this one as well. I liked him. But this one, I'm giving that edge rush help. I agree with Frank Frangie where you can't wait too long to address that need.
No, it's 100%.
It's 1A, 1B, 1C in terms of the pass rush help, the cornerback help, and that tight end help. So to me, the value wasn't there in the first round with all that edge rush on the edge rushers. So my second pick at 56, Derek Hall from Auburn. He had 7 sacks last season, 12 tackles for loss. He's a guy that may not be there as well, but I like that. And we kind of talk about the looking ahead situation where Josh Allen may not be here next year. He's in his 5th-year option. He's going to get paid whether it's by Jacksonville or someone else. And he's been a little underwhelming, a little inconsistent in his career. So would it surprise me to see Josh Allen gone next year if he has just an okay kind of season? No. And that's where Derek Hall kind of picked, where you're looking with an eye now and then an eye to the future. I think Derek Hall is that guy. I thought about the Mr. Ojulari there from LSU. I know Jamal's
I like BJ. I do like
an
BJ.
LSU guy, but I can't get over the Kaylavon chase on.
That's fair. That's fair. Hey, he's still on the roster too.
He's still on the roster. So Derek Hall's my guy in the 2nd round.
I like Derek Hall. He had a great week at the Senior Bowl. He should be able to provide some immediate help there on the edge. He'd definitely be a solid pick. I can't argue too hardly against that because I do like Derek Hall as a player. If he's on the board, he definitely should be in consideration for the pick. The only thing, when you were listing off the weaknesses, I'd put offensive line in the mix for that, and only because in the pre-draft luncheon, Trent Baalke also slipped in that Ben Bartch may not be ready for training camp. So where is that injury at? And if he's not ready, one thing you knew from late in the season, they have no depth at guard. So getting some offensive line depth is almost imperative because if Bartch can't go and you're back to looking at Shatley as a starter, which is fine, Shatley was serviceable late in the year, you're one injury away from him or Brandon Sheriff, who Sheriff has had his fair share of injuries, of putting guys on the field that did not play well last year, to put it very nicely. Ended up getting pancaked and things like that. No, they have to get some guard depth, so someone that can come in and at least compete just in case Ben Bartch is not physically ready to go.
And I like Osiris Torrance.
Yeah. That's the only thing. That's the thing, because for me, he's probably a first-round pick if the Jags are going to get him. And I don't necessarily want to put value for a guard there because I think you can get some of those guys in the middle rounds of the draft. But he would be a huge upgrade on the offensive line. He's probably going to be a guy that's going to be a Pro Bowler multiple years in his career.
At 24 to me, that may seem that's still maybe a little bit high.
Yeah.
I think, if you're going first round of Torrance, I wouldn't mind trading down a couple spots, picking up an extra day 3 draft pick and getting Torrance. And some of the
no
mocks
trades in these mocks.
I know.
No, straight picks.
I've seen quite a few mocks where they don't have Osiris Torrance in that first round. He's in that top of the 2nd round and the first 15 picks of the 2nd round. So again, if you're Jacksonville and you're sitting there on day 2 and Osiris Torrance is still on the board at pick 33 or 34, you got to even consider going up and investing in that position because guard is, to me, guard is more of a need than tackle. Just you don't see a lot of first-round guards in that. Again, that's a running back kind of situation. You take those guards latter half of the first round, tail in the first round, 2nd round kind of pick.
So many of those interior offensive linemen, you end up finding them on day 2 and day 3 in their instant starters. So that's what's kind of hurt the value there. All right, moving to the 3rd round, I went with Sam Laporta, a tight end from Iowa. I wanted to address some of the depth there. Laporta's been a high-volume player at Iowa. He was like the focal point of their passing attack. So if for whatever reason Evan Ingram got hurt, if Evan Ingram moves on in a year, Laporta is the natural next guy up. He also plays in some of those 2 tight end sets. He's an okay run blocker. I think once he's not the focal point of the passing game, he'll be able to improve that a little bit more. But he would give them a 2nd tight end, which that tight end room is barren. You've got Evan Ingram, then you got who?
Garrett Prince. And, oh, my gosh.
Garrett Prince, Luke Farrell. But you bring in a Sam Laporta, who's a guy, hey, Iowa does have a history with tight ends, too, so that helps. But I like Laporta as a pass catcher. I think he's able to bring something to the table for the Jaguars and help build out that the tight end room.
Yeah, and I'm totally on board with Jamal's pick here. It's the same guy I've got going. Tight end depth in this draft is, I've heard it say, I've read even on ESPN that this could be the best and deepest tight end class ever in draft history.
I believe it.
With the depth of this draft, and that's what kind of almost swayed me from taking a Michael Mayer. Took some swing in that first round because of the depth and the ability to find a guy. And Sam Laporta, you've been on Sam Laporta train for a little bit of time. If Jacksonville did not go tight end with number 88, I do like Gervon Dexter. I like Andre Carter II and Keanu Benton in that range. Questions on Andre Carter. I think he's kind of a tweener as an edge guy. I think he needs to add some significant weight. He's more of a developmental guy. Gervon is more of that plug-and-play defensive line guy where you can get him up to speed a little bit quicker. I think he's got more of an NFL body. Same thing with Keanu Benton. But I do like Sam Laporte at number 3.
I think Carter is going to end up, he has the height and length that Bulky loves on an edge player. Problem is he's like I'd almost say he's like a Jordan Smith prospect, where Jordan Smith, when they drafted him, they knew he needed to put weight on, but the problem is Carter's probably going to go, Smith was a 4th, 5th round pick a couple years back. And now, a couple years later, we're going to see if he can contribute. Same thing with Andre Carter. It's going to be, if whoever drafts him, 2 years later before this dude's able to contribute.
Yeah.
He's thin. At some point, I think he has the frame to put on weight, but he needs to do it. And that's the hard part.
Trent Baalke loves edge rushers.
He
loves
does. He
not
does.
as much on the defensive tackle. In his drafting career with the Niners and Jags, he's taken 12 defensive line players. 10 of those have been edge rushers. So 10 have been edge rushers. 2 have been
draft
tackles.
what you can't afford to sign.
Yeah,
and you can young edge rushers, even if they're just mediocre, get huge deals. So it just makes sense to draft them. You stockpile them where you can. If a guy's there, you go there because you can't afford them.
Yep.
Nobody can. Not if you're good. Okay, and with that in mind, that's when I finally get to an edge rusher in the 4th round, which is like, what am I doing? But at 121, I go Byron Young from Tennessee. In my mock draft, this is the one guy that I was like, I'm not sure he's still going to be on the board at this point. But as a rookie, he's going to be 25 years old, so I think some teams will be shied away. He's still a little raw, so there's going to be something to push teams away. But this is a guy that, again, fits the culture that the Jaguars want to build. He loves him some football. Dude came out of high school, didn't have the offers he wanted, was working at like a Dollar Tree or Dollar General or something, saw a flyer for the Georgia Military School football team, went, tried out, plays there at JUCO, ends up going to University of Tennessee, had like 7 sacks last season. I mean, he's an energy player. He loves football. He's a great athlete. He came to the Jaguars on a 30 visit. He has good length, a little light to be a 4-3 defensive end, but he could play that outside linebacker spot. I like Byron Young, especially at this point in the draft. I think he's a guy who could come in and contribute and give them some energy early on.
All right, so I'm taking the same name player in
Different
this draft. So I'm also having Byron Young to the Jags at pick 121, but this is the Byron Young from Alabama.
There you go,
So
okay.
there are 2 Byron Youngs.
Yeah.
So Jamal's got Byron Young from Tennessee. I've got the Byron Young from the Crimson Tide. Defensive tackle, I like him. He's 6'3", 295. He's got to get bigger to play that interior defensive line, but you add some that depth to that. So again, Roy Robertson Harris, he's back, but probably not long-term kind of guy. Devon Hamilton may not be long-term kind of guy. He's getting into that rookie career. I mean, you've got to have some depth on the defensive line. To me, this draft is about adding as much defensive help as possible because Trevor's going to grow and grow and grow. And adding Calvin Ridley, a better ETN, that offense to me needs some refinement, but you've got to be able in a conference where you've got Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, you've got to be able to put some pressure on the quarterback. They were exposed last year in that divisional round game against the Chiefs. So to me, all the defensive line help you can get, I think Byron Young, the Alabama Byron Young is my pick here.
No, the one thing I love about Alabama's Byron Young is that he came from Alabama. And the one thing you know about those guys is that they're going to come in and be able to play NFL football day one. I don't know where his ceiling's at, but I can tell you right now he can give you solid snaps on the defensive line from day one, and then he'll figure something out. He's going to play in the league. Like, think about it. How many of these Alabama defensive linemen come out and they play in the league for 4 or 5 years, and you're like, who's that guy? I don't even remember him at Alabama. That's who Byron Young is. He's going to be that kind of player. He's going to be solid. He'll do the dirty work. He'd be a good addition to the depth for the D-line. All right, we're kind of getting into the weeds. This is the point in the draft where you kind of start nitpicking, and you're kind of picking traits on guys, and some of this is like, what do they need? So we'll do one more, and then we'll kind of speed through the rest and kind of do an overall thing here. All right, so the last pick we'll do a little bit in depth is 127. How about that? All right, so I went O-line again. I went McClendon Curtis. He's from UT Chattanooga. He played both left tackle and right tackle and has played snaps at guard in college. Mm-hmm. In the NFL, he's probably going to be a guard or a right tackle. So, again, versatility, building out the offensive line. He's a guy who could come in and compete for that guard spot. and building the depth. So even with the addition of Bergeron, adding a Curtis McClendon is a guy who could come in and continue to make sure you have depth along the offensive line. Brandon Sheriff's getting up there in age. Tyler Shatley ain't exactly a spring chicken either. You need a backup along that offensive line on the inside. And then if you want him to compete at right tackle, whether that's because Walker Little's going to the left side or there's an injury and you have to make shifts around, he gives you that flexibility. Huge dude, big guy.
You know McClendon.
Yeah. And there's reports that the Jaguars have been checking out UT Chattanooga football to keep an eye on this guy because, I mean, he is a mountain of a man.
Yeah, so and Jamal covered him back in the day.
Purple Pounder. He was a Purple Pounder. How about that for a high school mascot? Chattanooga Central.
So I like the pick there. I like the pick there. I do stay on the offensive line here. Alabama guy for me, Emil Ikior.
Okay.
So 2 Alabama players off the board back-to-back for me.
He's just going to the Alabama well.
Yeah, again, he's a guard. He was an all-SEC guard, 3-year starter at right guard. Again, that's the Brandon Sheriff position. Just 1 sack allowed last season. So, again, I like the Alabama. I'm not a guy who likes those small school kind of guys like a previous Jaguars GM did. So Trent Baalke, I think you stick to what you know. SEC power, Alabama guy, Emil Ikior for my right guard position there. Yeah. So I like that with 127.
They've got to address that interior offensive line depth for sure. All right, I'll run through the rest of mine and then let you run through the rest of yours. I went at 185 went Ronnie Bell, a wide receiver from Michigan, solid player. 202 went Dante Stills, defensive tackle from West Virginia. He'd be an interior pass rusher, set the West Virginia record for tackles for a loss in a career, so knows how to get in the backfield but a little undersized. 208, I went Elijah Higgins. He played wide receiver at Stanford. He'll play tight end in the NFL. He's more of a developmental flyer. And at 226, the one guy that I really like is Jose Ramirez. He's an edge player from Eastern Michigan. Filled up the stat sheet there at Eastern Michigan. Who was he playing? I don't know. But he had 18.5 sacks in 2 seasons. So dude knows how to get to the quarterback. He just needs some refinement to his game. Definitely an athlete. So
okay, so here's my final 4 at 185. Back to the SEC, Warren McClendon. So you had McClendon Curtis. Yeah. I've got Warren McClendon. He played at Brunswick High School. He's a big guy on that line, 6'4", 305. Again, he could be a swing tackle in the NFL. He will need to have a little bit more refinement. He wasn't a every game starter for the Bulldogs, but I like Warren McClendon, Brunswick guy, at 185. 202, I went defensive tackle. Scott Matlock from Boise State. They've had him in for a official 30 visit. 6'4", 300-pound tackle. Again, I like the fact of kind of building for the future. He's a build for the future players. He had 49 tackles and 6 tackles for loss as a senior. So, again, a defensive tackle who had that penetration effort against that run and the pass. A very good pick there. At 208, going to the Florida well this time. Justin Shorter, receiver. And he's not a particularly fast receiver. If you've seen Florida games, he's not a particularly burner, but he is a big body. He's a 6'4" guy, 220, catch the ball, win those balls in traffic. More of a developmental guy for me. And then the 7th round, back to the Georgia well, Kenny McIntosh of Georgia. He's a lower mileage back. He's different than a Travis Etienne. He can catch the ball, had a bunch of catches last year, 43 for 504 and 2 touchdowns. And a guy that they really need to find. I know they have Dearness Johnson in free agency, but to me, you need a back that can come in and be a change of pace back from Travis Etienne. We know what Travis is about, but we saw last year in those short yardage, 4th and 1 situations, we just didn't have the ability to plug it up the middle like you did with James Robinson and get those final yard and a half for the first down. I think Kenny McIntosh is a good guy for that. Yeah, so
I think we went slightly different routes, but overall it was very much the same vein. I mean, in the first round we both addressed the secondary need to attempt to kind of alleviate some of the issues in the pass defense. Second round you went pass rush, I went O-line. We both went tight end in the 3rd. Then in the 4th round, I would finally get to the pass rush. And you went defensive line as well to give the defense a little bit of juice there. And then some more offensive line depth for me, offensive line depth for you after that. So we were in the same vein, kind of hitting some of the needs. I think the needs are very well established on this football team. The one place that you hit that I didn't get to was running back. There are some running backs that I like in the draft, but I think it is a need. They need to find somebody to at least come in and compete with Dearness Johnson
Right.
and with Snoop Connor for that position, whether that's a later round pick, if that's an earlier round pick. I mean, they brought in a few running backs for visits, guys like Tyjae Spears from Tulane, which would be a fun idea if they did make that draft pick.
I know you like him.
Hey, I do like him. I just start thinking about, like, giving defenses nightmares. You got one running back in Travis Etienne who can go 90 yards in a drop of a dime. And we talked about this before, like this. Oh man, when you look at this Jaguars offense, who can take it coast to coast out at any moment? Travis Etienne. They got to have him on the field because he's the only guy who could at the drop of a dime go 90. Well, what if Travis gets tired?
Right.
Man, we bring in Tyjae Spears, another guy who could go 90 at the drop of a dime. Like that's the thing that circles in my head is like, oh, that would be fun and adding to the firepower of the offense. Because like I said, going in, my balance was, while you want to invest in the defense, the Jaguars spend a lot of resources on building that defense.
Right.
It's still, it was good last year. It wasn't perfect, and there's still holes, but they spent a lot of money in free agency, draft picks. 2 first-round picks last year.
Yeah, 3 of your first 4 picks last year were
So
for
they've
defense.
spent a lot of resources there, and the one thing you don't want to get into the situation of is just neglecting the offense because you're like, Trevor will figure it out.
Right.
Like, Doug can game plan that. No, Doug needs some talent too.
You got to have some talent,
Yeah.
and I think it's not. Receiver has been kind of a position we beat a dead horse on for a couple years.
It's finally
on the
gone.
podcast, and you've got a core now of receivers. I think you've got the running back, at least the running back 1A, but you've got to me if your offensive line and your tight ends are not addressed, in this draft, day 2 at least, I think that's going to be some issues. Trent Baalke and Doug Peterson said at their pre-draft luncheon that they weren't as concerned about the tight end as maybe made out to be. They were happy with the room, and I just kind of.
I think they like Garrett Prince.
I could not believe what I was hearing. You've got to think that's a smokescreen, or they're going to address that position of the draft because you cannot go into the. Evan Ingram's not even signed his franchise tender yet.
Right.
He will, unless he just wants to forfeit almost $12 million.
He ain't doing that.
But he's going to be back, and then after that, who are you trotting out there for? Who's the blocking tight end? Who's going to be in that run game helping spring blocks?
They liked Luke Farrell a lot last preseason. Basically they made a position for him on the roster. They found a way to keep him. Because think about it, they didn't need him. You already had Chris Manhurts. You already had Dan Arnold. And if you think back to last preseason, there was like those 1 or 2 preseason games where he had like 9 or 10 targets because they were almost exclusively trying to see what he could do as a pass catcher. So Luke Farrell, they like what they've seen from him. And keep in mind, he was a blocker in college, so should be fine. We just haven't seen him do it in the NFL. Not much anyway. Garrett Prince, I get the feeling that they like what they've seen from Prince. Keep in mind, Prince was one of like the sleeper free agent targets for a lot of the national media last year. Came out of UAB, if I'm not mistaken. Caught a ton of touchdown passes in college. He's supposed to be sneaky fast and pretty good. But the one thing that kind of can almost give you a paperwork inkling that they like him, he was on practice squad all year. Think about how much they turned those practice squad guys. Like everybody else was turning on and off. They kept him just quiet. Locked him in, and there he was. So, but no, you can't be confident with that because you just haven't seen it.
To me, you've got to spend a day 2 draft pick on a tight end. I think you've got to. This tight end draft is so deep, and I'd love to get a Sam Laporta. I don't know.
I want Darnell Washington. I'm not going to lie to you. If he fell in the second round, take him.
Yeah, Darnell was gone in the simulator I ran, but Laporta, great. Dalton Kincaid is not going to be there. When they're picking in the second round, but you've got to get a guy from this draft who can instill some fear into an opposing defense with Evan Ingram out there on that field, and again build for the future. Evans may not be here next year after this franchise tag. They have not come to a long-term deal with him yet. So again, I think you've got to build for the future at least. And to me, Luke Farrell, Garrett Prince are not guys that I feel extremely comfortable about going into training camp with.
All right, we're winding down on time. Well, I got one question as we wrap things up. If Darnell Washington slips like midway through the second round, you trade up and go get him?
Ooh, that's tough.
So kicking some of them late picks. I know Trent Baalke loves his 6th rounders.
That's a tough one. So I don't know.
Because he's the perfect pair with Evan Ingram. You talk about running a 2 tight end set. Put a bulldozer on one side. Let's go.
Yeah, and he's huge. 6'7". The guy is just a monster. You didn't see a lot of him at Georgia with Brock Bowers there. Brock Bowers is a guy I'd love to add to this offense next year.
Yeah, they shouldn't be picking in the range to get him.
But that's
hopefully.
a good question. I think if you get into that, 5, 6, 7 picks away from Darnell, maybe something to consider. going up. And
if he's there around 50,
right.
midway 45 to 50 range, you go get him. He'd definitely be an interesting addition and be the perfect second tight end. I don't know how impactful of a pass catcher he'll be. All right, we're counting down the days to the draft. Don't forget, on draft day, we'll have plenty of coverage right here on Channel 4 at News4JAGs. We'll be live on Channel 4 and News4JAGs.com from 7 o'clock till 8 o'clock, and then we'll stay exclusively on News4JAGs.com and News4JAGs Plus from 8 to 9 once the draft starts. So we'll keep you up to date with some of those top picks. Hang out with us, see everything that's going on in our area. We'll get you ready for all the Jags picks. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next time.